Welcome into episode number 4 of the Real Wisdom Podcast, where every week I take a deep dive into the trenches of the film and television industries. I'm your host, Derek Diamond, and if you haven't yet, be sure to check out last week's episode where I had the pleasure of interviewing entrepreneur and film producer Jonathan Miller. And what was fascinating about the conversation with Jonathan is that he has run a successful company now for decades. And rather than just be content with that and rest on his laurels, he ventured into the world of film producing with Publisher Parish, which is a feature film that was shot out in Denver, Colorado during the pandemic. So he talks about the challenges that brought on, the challenges of just being a first-time producer, and he dropped some serious knowledge on yours truly and hopefully all the aspiring filmmakers who listen to it about the ways to finance your film and how to do it right. So if you're an aspiring filmmaker or if you're an established filmmaker and you haven't listened to it yet, definitely go check out that episode. It's in the archives. For this week's episode, this is going to be the most unique podcast that I've ever done. Not just in the young history of this show, but even dating back to the Derek Diamond experience. And that's because the subject matter has to do with my hometown. I haven't really made this public on the podcast until the outro last week, but those who know me, obviously know my backstory. I grew up in a small farming community named Jay. It's in the northwest portion of Santa Rosa County in northwest Florida. Lived there for the first 27 years of my life. And growing up, you always heard the stories about Jay and its past in I will say not being so kind to racial diversity. And when you're young, you don't know what's true and what's not because things can be over-exaggerated and flat out untrue sometimes. So you take that for what you will. But as I got older and started hearing more stories and even talking with people that live in Pensacola or in the surrounding areas, that reputation of Jay still was very prevalent. And I will say that I think Jay has made considerable progress. Is it where it needs to be? No. But I think, there are other small towns throughout the country that are not where they need to be. But, I think regardless of whether we're talking about your hometown or someone else's hometown, you can take a lesson in anything. And I think that's what people need to do with the documentary that we're going to be talking about today, which is called Welcome to Jay. It was directed by Jeffrey Morgan, who you'll be hearing next on the podcast. And, I had no idea that this documentary was even a thing until a couple of weeks ago when in a group chat that I have with a bunch of friends who all grew up in Jay, someone posted a link to I think it was the Facebook page, or it might have been the teaser for the eventual trailer. And it really drew me in. And I think part of it had to do with the fact that it was about my hometown. But it just drew me in like nothing that I've watched in a long time. And through the support of my wife, Samantha, I reached out to Jeffrey Morgan, and we had a wonderful conversation over the phone. He had agreed to do the podcast, but I wanted to talk with him on the phone first. And we had a great conversation about the making of this documentary and what eventually led to it. So once I had that talk with him, I knew this podcast was going to be something special. And everything from the backstory of how this documentary came to be is pretty insane. Because through attending New York University, Jeffrey met someone named Alice Brewton Hurwitz who wanted to tell the story of her family, who lives out in the McDavid area, which is a small community outside of Jay for those that aren't from the area. And then through making that documentary is when he started hearing about Jay, because it kept coming up in conversations. And that led to, then what led to it was the death of Gus Benjamin, who was an African-American kid who was killed at a bonfire party back in 2010 in the Jay area. And that's kind of the the backbone of this story and how it compares to a killing that happened in Jay back in 1922. So I don't want to get into the full description of the conversation here because Jeffrey tells it so well. And you won't hear me talk a ton through this interview because I really wanted Jeffrey to have the floor to tell this story and why this story was important for him to tell. And I will say in closing, my one regret about this interview is that we did it before the trailer dropped, because since then it's gotten over 137,000 plays on Facebook and 21,000 plays on YouTube. That is nuts when it comes to independent film, especially documentary film. This trailer has just blown up and has caused so much conversation, which is exactly what a trailer is supposed to do, and this gets to my point. I've seen a lot of comments on Facebook over this past weekend that really disappointed me, because the purpose of a trailer is to get you talking about a film and makes you want to see a film. And just seeing so many, and I'm not going to name names, but just seeing so many uninformed and sometimes flat out ignorant comments about something that they haven't seen is really disappointing. And not everyone has been like that. I have seen some very good takes about this trailer, and also some very bad ones. But I'll say this, and then we'll get into the interview with Jeffrey. Regardless of whether or not this is about your hometown or someone else's hometown, you should look at it for what it is. It's the telling of a very tragic story, and if you can learn something from it, because I'm of the belief that you should never stop growing, you should never stop learning, you should always try to be a better person. If you can take that away from this documentary, then I think you've shown true signs of growing as a human being. So with that being said, here is my conversation with Jeffrey Morgan. Happy to be here with documentary filmmaker Jeffrey Morgan. Jeffrey, how are you?
I'm good. Thanks for having me on the podcast, Derek.
Yeah, absolutely. And we had it's been great kind of getting to know you over the past few days, because I, as you know from the podcast and you being a filmmaker yourself, I always enjoy meeting new filmmakers, kind of getting their take on their work, kind of their background, because as you well know, there's not a how-to guidebook on how to get into making movies. Everybody kind of has their own unique ways. So let's dive right into your beginnings. What was it that made you want to pursue filmmaking in the first place?
So I grew up in Juneau, Alaska. So, and people look at you like, well, Alaska, like it's such a crazy place, but it's in a rainforest. So it rained probably 300 plus days out of the year. So what do? You go to the movies. And so that's really where I fell in love with movies and storytelling, and, renting videos at Valley Video, just down from the glacier, Mendenhall Glacier. And it was growing up in a small town and just having that kind of classic two screen cinema. And I spent so many days in there and fell in love with it. And then as I kind of got older in like junior high school, I started writing scripts and getting into like, how do you make this? Someone makes this, it kind of occurred to me. I think when I saw Psycho, when I saw Alfred Hitchcock film, it was like, oh, like there's someone behind this and like crafting this and the cinematography, and you just start to learn and read as much as you could. And like you said, you glean what you can, from books and from special features, at some point special features on laser discs back in the day, just kind of learning and getting inspired. And we moved to Las Vegas when I was in high school. So that was quite a shift from like the coldest place on earth to the hottest. And so that was the same thing. Like I spent all time in the air conditioning because I didn't want to be out in the 120 or 115 degree heat. So it was, I feel like it was a perfect childhood and upbringing for someone to be interested and passionate about film and filmmaking. And
I imagine that
yeah,
had to be a bit of a shock going from Alaska to the desert of Las Vegas.
and the going from, what was essentially like, we didn't live Juneau, the city was about 40,000 people,
Right.
but we lived out in the Glacier Valley. And so that was a very, kind of small town. Like, you knew your neighbors, you knew the people that lived up the, like, you knew everybody. And so going from that to Las Vegas, which is a big city, was definitely a shock.
Yeah,
we
for
didn't even
sure.
have we didn't even have the Simpsons up in Alaska. Like, the t-shirts would come out and we were like getting excited and wearing the stuff and Bart Simpson, but we hadn't even actually seen an episode of the Simpsons, because this was the late 80s, early 90s, right? So it was crazy. We'd go on vacation, it would be like this amazing thing to be able to watch an episode of the Simpsons, because they didn't have Fox channel on the TV up there.
That's crazy. Yeah, it's almost like the Simpsons are these kind of like mythical people that like you wear the merchandise, you know who they are, but you don't get to
Yeah,
see what makes them them. So yeah,
yeah.
that's fascinating. That's really
But even on the
fascinating.
t-shirt, it was appealing to a, whatever, 12, 13-year old. It was appealing.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So you mentioned, growing up watching movies, you're in these, it kind of brings back memories of me going to like a two-screen theater in the local mall that we had when I was a kid, and really
Yeah,
kind of falling in love with the storytelling of filmmaking. So
yeah.
once you get a bit older, what direction do you go in order to make that a reality?
I started making films in high school, so in Vegas. I was probably around 15. Yeah, 15. The summer when I turned 15. I kind of wrote this script. It was a horror script. I was watching Tales from the Crypt, the HBO show back in the day. And I was like, oh, why don't I try to make one of these? And so I wrote a script kind of based on one of the comic books from the 50s, cast my uncle in it and my aunt and my cousins. I mean, they were terrible acting, but it was just like the joy of making a film for the first time. And they were like such good sports. And my grandfather too was in it. It was fantastic. It was like, it was a horrible story. It was like, someone gets murdered and they put him in a vat of acid to get rid of him. It was a ghoulish story, but it was the joy of filmmaking and discovering, cutting and putting the cameras. And I just kind of went from there. And I started watching everything I could. I think I went through the, 100. I watched like 100 movies plus in the summer. Like, I was doing like three a day, and it was just inspiring me to write little short films and scripts. And I would cast like, my high school cast year was, my student, my classmates, and we do a big premiere at the school, and it's just, I fell in love with that. And I wanted to go to film school. I kind of applied everywhere, kind of had my fingers crossed, and I was lucky enough to get to NYU Film School, which was, and I'd never been to New York City. Um, I'd only seen it on TV, and my parents, they figured out a way to send me, but they said, well, you can't visit, we can't afford to have you go visit, so you just have to decide, do you want to go? We figured out a way with scholarships and stuff for you to go. So I said yeah, and headed off to New York City, and arrived and was like, this was the biggest mistake I made, because it was such a shock and different. I mean, if you've ever visited New York City, it's just such a bustling place, and it's just filled with so many people. Like, you walk out on the street and there's just an energy, like, there's life, like, everywhere. Things are going on in scenes. So it was, but it was great, and I actually fell in love with the city. I ended up living there for a couple decades before we kind of went to the suburbs. But it was a great place to kind of study film and, you know meet people, have those new experiences, which lead to new storytelling and new ideas. Yeah,
That's such an interesting journey to go from Alaska to Vegas to New York because you're really kind of experiencing, you know, pretty much both sides of the country. In Alaska's, much farther up north, but yeah, funny enough, I've been to New York one time with my now wife, and you really get that sense as soon as you get into the city that it's just this energy that's not like anywhere else. I've been to
It,
Denver, I've been to Los Angeles, to San Diego. New York
yeah,
has a very unique energy to it.
I mean, it's almost like a living organism. The city
Mm-hmm.
it breathes and pulsates. It's funny. It's like the suburbs, is much more relaxed and laid back. But it's like whenever I go visit the city, it's like you feel a little bit more alive. You feel a little bit more connected to everything too. So it's a really cool place, and of course, it has its ups and downs, like everywhere. There's positives, there's negatives, but it's a great place. And for art and film, if you love film, there's so many movie theaters there. Like you can see old movies and new movies, and silent films, like MoMA screens, classic films, and they're all beautiful presentations. And I remember there was a theater there called the Ziegfeld that I used to go to in high school every year, and it was like one of those old. It was like a dance theater perform, like this beautiful space, ornate, red curtains. I mean, it was like a classic movie palace. And I remember seeing probably one of the best film experiences of my life was seeing Alfred Hitchcock's Vertigo on 70 millimeter in that space. And it was just, it was unbelievable. It was an unbelievable experience. Not only for the film, but like that, seeing it in that space and that environment and that theatrical experience was amazing. I saw it like 15 times, I think.
Oh
It was
wow.
crazy. Like I loved that film. I don't know what it was. It's a very, it's a sad film. It's a strange film. It's a dark film, but there's something about it that's just like it hypnotizes you and mesmerizes you and kind of brings you under its power and spell, and you just can't look away.
Hitchcock has a way of doing that. With like Vertigo, Rear Window. It might be my favorite Hitchcock film. There's something I was so simple about them, but they just kind of draw you in. And he's one of the greatest storytellers to me in
Yeah,
in
visual
culture.
storytelling. Yeah. And he came, and here we are talking about Hitchcock, and it is August 13th, which was his birthday.
Yeah,
So of course, I had to bring him up. So he's definitely one of my influences. And you think about if you're working on a sequence or a script or or even documentary, like you're putting together a scene, and you think about how do you affect the audience? How do you tell this story visually? Versus just audio or straightforward. Like he always thought about how do I tell the story cinematically, visually, putting one image against another to create a new meaning. And yeah, he's I know he has some issues and things have come up about his personal life and past and dealing with actresses, but as a filmmaker, as a craftsman, he's one of the best. And I would say anyone looking to really get serious about film, study his work, read Hitchcock Truffaut. The interview that Francois Truffaut did with him is a masterclass in filmmaking.
100%. So moving into your own work, I introduced you as documentary filmmaker, and that's because I know you've done one that you were gracious enough to send to me, called Lillie and Leander: A Legacy of Violence.
That's
How did the idea of this come about?
So yeah, I had made a documentary in high school, and another short films. I think 30 minutes. One was about an hour, but kind of student learning. And so I really was focused in NYU. I was focused on narrative. I was writing scripts and that, and I even after school, like I'd written a couple features, and I was trying to get it made, and it was so difficult to get a feature film made. And of course, I wrote something that I couldn't shoot in the backyard or shoot close by. I had to write something that was thousands of miles away in the desert to film. Like, you can't film that in New York City. And so I was working on that and, throwing things against the wall, trying to get that script going, and it had some movement, but it, ultimately it just kept trying to set it up with to produce, pieces just kept falling apart. And, of course I wanted to make something. And one of my teachers at NYU, directing teacher, her name was Joan Horvath. She introduced me to another woman who worked at NYU, in the registration department. Her name was Alice Brewton Hurwitz. And I didn't know Alice when I went to the film school. I knew of her because I remember there was a woman from the South who everyone had to go see. If you wanted to change a class, you had to go see Alice. But everyone loved to go see Alice, from what I remember. It was she. I always knew what I wanted, and I picked my classes, so I never had to really go see Alice. So I never got to know her, but I knew of her. And so I met her, and she, my teacher was like, she's this, she has a really interesting project. She's doing, like, it's mostly shot on home videos. She's been researching a story, in her family's past. And so I met Alice, and she was from Pensacola, Florida, born and raised, and she, ended up in New York City, working up there. I think she went to NYU, and she ran an art gallery for a while, but she ended up working at NYU Film School. And she told me about this story, and her great great aunt Lillie was allegedly raped and murdered by a black man named Leander Shaw in 1908. And she had heard little stories about this when she was young, from her grandmother, and it was just fascinating. Like, it was just a story that, like, she couldn't believe that this story was part of her family's history. The black man, they caught him and they put him in the jail. He never withstood trial because an angry mob of 3,000 people kind of came into Pensacola and gathered in the plaza, broke into the jail, and lynched, Leander Shaw in Plaza Ferdinand. And she was trying to find out everything she could about this story, talking to her relatives, her, great uncles, and, like, introducing herself, meeting people, because she was just like, I'm just so curious about this thing happening in my family. I want to know more. You want to know where you came from. You want to, I think everybody is curious. Like, where, if there's some story or something in your history, it's like you want to know what it is, because it enriches you, like, it informs kind of the present. And she was really kind of on this journey to try to figure out what it was. And she interviewed a great uncle that she had met, who lived up in the country in Bogie, McDavid area. And he was like 94, 95 at the time, as I recall. And this would have been like 2001. And she sat down for an interview with him, and he told her what he knew about the Lillie story, and the black man and that interaction and the lynching. And then he said, went into a story that after that, after the lynching, Lillie's father and her uncle, he alleged that every time a black man would come by their home, and they lived on a road up in the country, there was a curve in the road, they would meet in the middle. One would call the other one on a cranking telephone, and he would say, N-word coming your way. And they would meet at the middle, and they would trap the black man, take him in the woods, kill him, and bury him under a walnut tree. And he said it went on for years. And at one point, I think they asked him how many. I'm not sure if that's in the film, but he kind of indicated it was a lot. It was countless. Someone heard him say hundreds. So it was this oral history story that was somewhat incredible, but also horrific. And she didn't know what to do with it. This was not something she knew or expected to find. And that's kind of where, I was kind of brought in, and she had some of this home video footage, and she needed someone to help her cut it. And I was just out of school like a couple years, so I needed the money. That's why I did it. And I met Alice, and it was just like, I helped her kind of form this story. And it was, I hadn't, I said I'd done a couple documentaries, and it was just this incredible, rich story filled with these really fascinating, interesting people who had, and this past, and it was just something that was like one of the best stories that I had ever been involved with, and it was real. and I'd always been interested in a documentary. Even the scripted work that I had been trying to do was kind of rooted. We would shoot it like a documentary, like it would be real. Like, and I gravitated to that. Hitchcock is very not that, but I gravitated. I watched a lot of films from the '70s and films that kind of had that kind of realism and authenticity in the performances. And so, the documentary was an appealing, medium for me. So when we had put some stuff together, and the project kind of sat for 2 years, 2 or 3 years, because she was kind of wringing her hands. She didn't know what to do with it, and someone finally referred her to someone in the state attorney's office that you could trust, because she didn't know, if I take this to someone, are they going to be friendly? Are they going to help? Are they going, she didn't know what to do, and then, of course, her family, like, how are they going to react? Trying to tell this history. And so the state attorney took the story very seriously, and he brought in a FDLE officer to investigate, and they decided they were going to try to find out what the truth was in this story, if they could, because it was, it happened, we're talking 1908, to maybe 1930s. We don't know exactly, but we know, Lillie's father died, I think, in the mid to late 20s. So, but there was some talk that the boy, the sons were involved as well. So that was, next thing I knew, we didn't really have much funding, but and Alice wasn't, she wasn't a filmmaker, but she wanted to be involved. And there were a lot of people that were wanted to help her tell this story. But a lot of them were like, they wanted to take the project. You're just the subject, and we're going to make the movie, but you're just going to be in the movie. And she couldn't do that. And I recognized that too. I was like, this is your story. This is your family. You need to be involved. So we partnered together. She produced the film, and then I directed and shot the film, and ended up editing the film too. And so, like, a week later, after the state attorney decided they were going to investigate it, I was like in the back of a FDLE car headed up to Boji for the first time. And I had visited Pensacola before in the area, just kind of going through. And I remember, I remember being in the Plaza Ferdinand area at the time, and being in there's like a nightclub or a Seville.
Yeah, Seville Quarter. Yeah.
Yeah. I remember being at Seville, when the first time I went, and just, I don't know, I think I had a cigar, and I was just like chilling out, with some friends, and I was just in the back, and there was just like this, I don't know, there was something, I always remember like sitting back there, and it was one of those moments where you can kind of look outside yourself, and you kind of feel like you're in this special moment. But I didn't even know why, because it's like, I'm in the Seville in Pensacola, Florida. But it turns out that, like, probably 50 or 100 feet from there was where Leander Shaw was lynched. And it would become such a big part of my life to help Alice tell this story. So that was it. And that film we made from 2004. It was probably late 2004 until it came out 2007 and debuted at the Tribeca Film Festival.
I haven't really discussed this on the podcast, but like, people who know me know I'm originally from that area. I'm from Jay, which we'll get into the Jay documentary here shortly.
Mm-hmm.
But I know the McDavid area very well. It's a short drive
Yep.
away. What was fascinating was, my wife and I watched Lillie and Leander last night, and it was just so fascinating. And partially it's because it's the area we grew up in. We know it, but still, to see that story unfold and in the way that it did was really, really powerful. I think, it's the way you told it was very well done.
Oh, thank you. I mean, it was really one of the great experiences of my life. Like, not only as a person, but as a filmmaker too, but also as a person. Like, it was profound to be witness to that happening, and you felt like it was one of those stories where it's like lightning in a bottle. It's like, this story is going. You can't go out and raise money and wait and see if you can get the funds. It was like, I at the time I was working at Deutsche Advertising in New York. I was an editor, assistant editor at that time, and we had some video camera equipment and different things, and like that was one of the perks is they would let you borrow it to go out and do your own projects. So that was, to me, that was one of the reasons I took the job. I was like, oh, well, they have this equipment and there's editing you do on the off. So I was always thinking like, yes, I can pay my rent, but I can use this to help further my filmmaking career. So it was being there on the ground and filming, and also it was very um inspiring and powerful and uplifting to me to see these folks from the deep south. And people have, people outside the deep south, some people, not all, have stereotypes and look at people a certain way. And to see all these folks, they were out there and they cared, and they were almost all the people that went on the investigation, they were, I think all of them, they were all volunteers. They weren't being paid. They were there because they wanted to help get to the bottom and find the truth of what happened on this road, in Boji. And that was very powerful. And I felt like seeing those images and seeing that happen is also is healing, too, for other communities, to see it's because people cared, you know, this happened. If this happened in my community, I want to get to the bottom of it. I want to know what happened, and I want others to know what happened. And after that film, the investigation ended at a certain point, and I don't want to spoil, but the film kind of ends with a cliffhanger. But I continued, like, after that, to continue to lead, to call up the volunteers, because they told me, to say, Jeff, if you want to go out and look and you can get permission, we're there with you. Like, we're shoulder to shoulder. We'll go out and keep looking for these men because we believe there's something there, and we want to find them, and we want to give them that respect and dignity if we can, you know. And
That had to be
you saw
inspiring.
it was, and so I felt like I had to. Then I felt like this was like beyond filmmaking, because I filmed it, of course, but I felt like I most of the time I was digging, like I became part of that search, because I really believed that, and I do believe that it did happen. The question is how many, but I do believe there's more than one. Even if there, I said, even if there, and a lot of people felt that way, even if there was one person that was murdered and put out in the woods and we never knew their name and they never had their story told, I would have still gone out and looked, and I would have done that because, you know, I would want someone to do that for me if that happened. So anyway, it was a profound kind of experience, in my life. And, we did everything we could. At the end of the day, I think the last time we went out was probably 2013. And I think we got very close. I think we actually found where the tree was on the ground finally. And, it was in a wash. That was the thing. The tree was there and there was a wash, and that was the natural formation of the land. And they probably, didn't bury them very deep, and they probably just collapsed the sides to get rid of the body. And so I kind of saw that, and we all kind of felt like it was probably, they were gone. And if there was anything left, it was so small that we probably wouldn't even recognize it, with our eyes. So, but I felt like we took it as far as we could, and I think the volunteers did too. And they were just, yeah, just great people. I know some of them have passed on since, but they were just ready to go. There were some characters in the film that you didn't really get to see that kind of became more involved in the search. With the Metal Detector Club, Rosemary Sanders, she was the president, and she was always game to go out, and she had her husband, Eddie, too, would go rent a little backhoe, and he'd be operating it. I didn't even know if he knew how, but he was, and Russ Edgar supported this, at the state attorney's office, and he was the attorney that kind of led the case, and he kept supporting, and he'd help get us out there, if we wanted to look. So it was a real group effort, and it was all, done, out of love and the search for justice, and to give the men respect. And, it was a long journey.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah,
as documentaries and storytelling can be. I say this quite a bit on the podcast, and I mostly because I mostly talk about the narrative type of filmmaking, where when you get a crew together, whether it's very low pay or even less than that, if you see that they believe in the story you're telling, that is so invaluable, and it can be so motivating. I can imagine seeing all these volunteers that, and some of them even continued to come out after the
yeah.
film was technically done. That had to be motivating on a whole different level.
No, it was, and I think they were also motivated initially that Alice, that this was her family, that her ancestors allegedly did these horrible deeds. They murdering innocent men is the allegation for no other reason that they were walking on the wrong road at the wrong time. And certainly there were people in the family that didn't want her to do this. I mean, you saw in the film there were people that were very against like keeping the past buried, not bringing it up, and there were also a lot of people that felt like it was important, and people in the white community, people that really took a stand and they wanted to be there and help. And Alice, to her credit, like that was very difficult for her. That's her family, but she did it, and I had a tremendous amount of respect for her, and it was an honor to help document her story and to bring it to audiences so they could see. And my hope is that it would inspire other people to do some things similar, to have that kind of strength and fortitude. And anyway, it was a. I mean, clearly, it's. I've been all of my professional work in documentary since 2004. In terms of serious documentary work, feature work, has all been in Northwest Florida, Escambia County and Santa Rosa County, which kind of takes maybe to our next topic.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think this will be a good segue. That I give major credit to her, as you mentioned, to echo your statements, because, and I might ruffle some feathers by saying this, but I don't. I believe that it's the truth. History can be quite ugly, but you don't learn from it unless you truly understand it and why it needs to be told. Because as a human race, we learn from history. It's like that old saying, those who don't learn from it are doomed to repeat it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it can be ugly. And I say this also, over the last couple of years, I've had to confront some pretty bad qualities about myself. And it was not fun at all.
I mean, we all have them too. We're all human. We all have that, but that's a good thing.
But if you confront the issue and you truly understand why it's wrong, that's when you truly grow as a
Yes.
person, in my
Yep.
opinion.
And I think that's the same as a society, or as you know a town or a city. Like confronting those hard truths in the past, and not just the bad things, but the good. You talk about the good things too, but
Oh yeah.
part of the story of the past is the failings, or the tough history, the stuff that's difficult. And because like Alice, it's like your ancestors did this, so it's a hard thing to grapple with. But it's also like you didn't do those things. Alice didn't do those things. And I think being able to separate herself from what her grandfather, and it doesn't mean she doesn't have respect for the other things he did, but I mean, that's an extreme case, right? That's an
Right.
extreme case.
Yeah.
Mass murder is different, I guess, differently, but it's still, even that, like, there's good, there's positive things and there's negative things about people in the past, and in the present too. Things are, the truth, I always say the truth is in the gray areas. It's in the middle usually. I think often we want to paint things as bad, or good or evil, and but the truth is, like, we're all, like I said, we're all human, and the truth is somewhere in between. Like everyone, the people, and also the people that lived 100 years ago or 200 years ago, they're human beings. They're us. Like we're, DNA replications of them. Like we're prone to the same things that they were prone to, as people. And, I think society, and we've evolved a lot, but, we're prone to the same failings or the same, and we're also prone to the same positive things too, the great things that they did. So I really believe you have to embrace like all of history, to learn from it, to grow, as you say.
Yep, 100%. So, moving on to your current documentary that, as we're recording this, will just be a couple of weeks away from premiering at the Tallahassee Film Festival, called Welcome to Jay.
Yeah.
Talk to me about kind of how the ball got rolling on that.
Yeah. So it actually, it goes all the way back to probably like 2005, 2006, when we were making Lillie and Leander. So we were up in North Escambia County, and we were trying to, we're interviewing in the Black and white communities in Pensacola, and then the Black communities and the white communities in the north end of Santa Rosa County, trying to find stories of violence, or, what are people's impressions about Boji McDavid or that area where these murders were alleged to happen, to see what was left in the oral history. Was there anything there that would support the story that Alice's relative told about the murders? And we heard some, stuff. Boji McDavid, I heard that was a bad place. It was a bad area. We heard some, but almost everywhere we went, and this is your hometown, I know, but everywhere we went, we heard, and it was specifically the Black community, Jay, Florida. It would come, that would, before they got to Boji or anything else, I heard Jay was a bad place. It was not safe for Black people. My parents told me, don't go there. Don't go there after dark. I've never been there, they'd say. I have got no reason to go to Jay. That's, I remember some people said. Some people had gone, they would go to the doctor over there, they said. They would, go to the pharmacy. They never had any problems, but they wouldn't go after dark. And it was because their parents taught them. It was just the same as like, don't cross the street on a red light, Don't, those simple rules as a child was being passed down in the Black community. Don't go to Jay, Florida after dark. Don't go there if you're Black. It's not safe. And there were stories about, rumors and stories about, they had a sign. And the sign you saw in Lillie Leander too. There was a sign mentioned, with the N word. And so, we would hear little bits and pieces. Most people had no idea. I was like, do you know where that comes from? Do you know why? No, that's just what I've always heard. And that was the majority. I would say that's probably like 70% of the people we talked to. But we started getting into, especially Century, which is not far from Jay. It's just across the river, north end of Santa Rosa County, of Escambia County. Jay is in the north end of Santa Rosa County. So right across the river, there's a town of Century, and there's a good sized Black population. And so we started interviewing there, and some of it we would just see a couple people on the porch, and we'd just come up. We had so we had a kind of a liaison, like a community liaison, who was and she's actually associate producer on Welcome to Jay. I think she's one of the first African American students to graduate with a master's degree from UWF, and we got put in touch with her. Valerie Hollinger. She's an awesome lady. She's a fantastic person. And so she, because sometimes, they didn't want to talk to Alice or even me. I don't know if they knew what to make of me, because I didn't mention, but my background, so on my dad's side, I'm Native American. My grandfather was full Paiute from Northern Nevada. And I'm a card carrying member of the Fallon Paiute tribe in Northern Nevada. And my mom's side, she's white, and her ancestry I've traced back to the Mayflower. So it's very kind of, so people weren't sure, Native American, white guy, like they weren't sure what I was. So, but, Valerie kind of helped sometimes open those doors, and they would invite us, and we would start talking with them and told them what we were doing. And then, we said, we want to interview and document your stories. And a lot of them were open to doing that. And so we started hearing these specific stories about, my husband was from Jay, he was born in Jay, and then he had to come out of Jay. And, we heard this, from multiple people. We started hearing this story, and then, and then it got a little bit more specific, it's this oral history of a story a long time ago. There was a black farmer and a white farmer in Jay, and they got into an argument over a cultivator. This gentleman said, we did the research, and it wasn't a cultivator; it was a stock cutter. So it's similar, but you see how to the telephone, how that works. Oral history is not always exact, but it gets it. Often it's pretty close. Certain things are exaggerated, or they don't get the detail right sometimes, but it was pretty close. And that, the white man in the argument over this cultivator, as he said, was shot. The black man shot him, and the white man ended up dead. And, he didn't go into all the details. It was just the base story. And that, after that, like his mother and father just bought a home in Jay, he said, and then they had to leave, they were forced to leave. And we heard the story. And it was a heartbreaking story to hear, because it wasn't anything that we could see was documented historically anywhere. It wasn't written down. It lived in the memory of these people who were the children, most of whom were children or wife or spouse of somebody who experienced this kind of, exodus from the town of Jay. And it didn't really have a place in Lillie and Leander. That was Alice's journey. Her story was very specific to North Escambia County, the Bogie McDavid area. And you saw Jay comes in a little bit just because it was said so much. I put it in, and I feel like local people would know that, we're talking Bogie McDavid, but that there was a stigma about the north end of counties in this general area, especially to an outside audience. So I did include some of that in the film, but we had all these interviews with people that had this kind of incredible historical event, which was so significant, so significant. And it felt like this was where the reputation came from. Like there was this event that happened that was almost like a bomb went off in the Black community. It was a devastating event for the families, and it had reverberated over time. And for some families, they still had the base story, the specifics. And for others, it just became, don't go to that town. It's dangerous. And, and after that event, I think, the town of Jay became, there was many towns like this, but a sundown town where, black people were not allowed to be there after dark. And Jay's not unique. There were towns like this all over the country. There was towns like this in New Jersey and New York. This is, and I say this, like this story that we're telling about Jay, it's about Jay, it's about the microcosm, but it's about this history of America. This is our history. This is all of our history. And so it helps, I think, to understand how the past and the present have that conversation and dialogue by comparing the present and the past. And so that, though we had these interviews, they're sitting in, they're on mini DV tape. That's how long ago it was. Yeah,
I remember those quite well.
Before it was the DVX 100, the Panasonic DVX 100, which oh my God, I love that camera. I wish someone would make that camera with all the technology, and maybe they have, and I just haven't used it. But like that, running for documentary, like running around with that camera, it had the anamorphic adapter too, so you got extra resolution. It's only SD, but like it looked pretty good, for its day. But it was so easy. It had a zoom, and it was just so form functional. Like it was a beautiful tool for documentary. But we filmed all those interviews on the DVX 100, and we had these mini DV tapes, in the closet and backed up on hard drives. And I just was like, somehow these stories and this oral history that we had documented, I wanted to figure out some way to tell that story one day, but I didn't know how. Fast forward, to 2010, because those interviews were like 2005, 2006. maybe in a little 2007 before we finished. Um, Fast forward to 2010, and I kind of followed the news. I read, like, if I lived in a place, or that, like, I just, or spend a lot of time in a place, like, I'll follow the news, and I'll subscribe to. I think I was looking at Northeast Gambia news, maybe even at the time, a Pensacola News Journal, and I read about a case about a young man named Gus Benjamin. He was a black teen, 18 years old, and he went to a party in Jay, Florida, and it was actually Berrydale, but it was kind of there's all these little communities kind of in and around Jay, but they're all kind of, in the larger community, they kind of just, that's Jay, right? Jay area. And I think partly is because of what happened, right? In the old days, like Jay has kind of become this monolith in people's subconscious, especially in the black community. So I read about this story. So this young man named Gus Benjamin from Brewton, Alabama, he went to a bonfire party with some friends in Jay, and he ended up shot in the back with a hunting rifle by the end of the night, and he died. The young man who was accused and put on trial for murdering him was named Robert Franklin Floyd. He was 22 years old at the time. And the story, just reading the details that were reported, it was a heartbreaking story. Like, you see, these were all like young people, and you want to know why this happened. And I didn't know, there was talk about it being racially motivated. Of course, that topic got brought up because of where it happened. It was, it kind of brought up all of those feelings from the past, right? Those things that happened a long time ago that weren't ever documented or dealt with, and now they were all coming up, and there was hundreds of posts on Northeast Gambia News and all the different sites, people fighting and arguing and fear and anger and pointing, and no one knew what happened. Like, people were saying, this is what happened, and this is, and all, you can almost see like this oral history of the event being created in real time, online, on social media. So I was curious, like, what really happened, and it seemed to be potentially, because I didn't know, it could have, was it racially motivated or was it not? But I was curious because of the reputation, I guess. I had heard enough about the town, and I had been to Jay before. Like, we visited, like, during Lillie Leander, we heard so much about the town of Jay that we're like, we need to go there. I think Alice had been before. She's from the other, but we need to go there. And Valerie came too, our associate producer. But it was interesting, even to see, like, her nervousness going into the town, having never been there, just based on the mythology and the oral history that we had heard. I don't want to say mythology because it was actually, these were actual stories. But it was, it was a beautiful town, actually. I mean, it was the, beautiful fields and, water towers. Like, it was just a picturesque, beautiful town. I mean, you grew up there. There's like a nice little downtown. It's quaint. It's a very beautiful place. But yet it had, it had this past. It had this cloud, and so I saw potentially the way to tell the story, the oral history that we had gathered, that was just sitting in a closet gathering dust, a way to tell those stories and to have those people speak their truth, potentially, and also kind of draw a line, maybe, because I didn't know. I hadn't really, I didn't know what it was going to be. I mean, that's the beauty of documentary, I guess. You have an instinct, I think this could be something interesting, or an interesting way to tell this old story, maybe. And so I wrote to the judge of Robert's trial. It was Judge Burgosh, and I told him I had done this first film, Lillie Leander, Legacy of Violence. I told him what it was about. I think I probably gave him a link to watch it, and I told him, my intention is to create a film that shows what really happened, because I said that, there's a lot of things going on and no one knows what really happened. and the courtroom is the most, I think, pure place to know what the truth is. You have people that come and they're under oath and they put their hand on the Bible and they swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. And you get to hear from all people involved in a kind of a, and cross-examined, right, by both sides, what happened. So to my surprise, he let me come in and film the 7-day murder trial, with stipulations. You had to be in this spot or this spot. I had two spots I could be in. Most of the time I stayed frontal, but there was, a couple of times I went to the side to get profiles. But it was, it was a 7-day trial, and it was probably the only, I think I never actually served on a jury in my years of jury service. They'd always got excused, or I told, they would ask me, what do you do? And I would say, well, I'm a documentary filmmaker. And they'd say, well, what's your film about? I would tell them about Lillie Leander, and they'd be like, you're excused. I don't know. I was like, I was offended. I was like, wait, what does that mean? Like, I guess they couldn't
Uh,
read me, maybe. They didn't know which way I would go in the case, whatever the case was. Um, but anyway, it was a privilege to be given that opportunity, to bear witness of what happened, at that party.
and
So
I'll be honest, to give a little behind the scenes, you and I talked on the phone, because
yeah,
I didn't know that this documentary was a thing until very recently. And of course, my interest is going to be pretty
yes,
substantial because it's
sure.
featuring the town I grew up in,
Town you're
and knowing
from.
the reputation that it
Yeah.
has.
Hmm.
And honestly, I was nervous to reach out to you because I was thinking, should I cover this topic on the podcast? And
And it's,
and my wife supported this. She's like, you
yeah.
absolutely should do it.
And here's the thing: it's like people we interviewed. So this film, Welcome to Jay, I started filming it in 2011. I guess that's the first time I went down to Jay, um, and just started filming some scenes. Some fields and shots from the car. Car mounted shots. Just getting kind of general stuff. Just that's kind of how I get into a project, is to start filming the landscape, or the B-roll, we call it. You film the B-roll
Right.
and just start to kind of immerse yourself in the town and what it looks like, what, how it feels. And I also, I wanted, on that trip, I wanted to make, and I wanted to reach out to both families, but in particular, I wanted to reach out to Gus's family, because I knew that I would not make, he's a young man who's dead. His life is gone. He's 18. He's not coming back. I wanted to make sure that they were okay with a documentary being made, but or I wouldn't have done it. I wouldn't have. I just I wanted them to and of course I wanted to meet them. I wanted to get a sense of his life, and I did that for Robbie at 1.2. I'll get to that. Um, so I reached out to his family. I didn't know his mother's phone number. This was before the trial. I didn't know the mother's phone number. So we had reached out to his uncle, I believe, or one of his relatives that we found, online. We were able to find, and he seemed open to talking to us. We were going to be in town. Myself and my associate producer Valerie, like, we went up to meet him, and I think something happened, and we weren't able to meet with him, or he maybe was uncomfortable. It's this film started in 2011, and it's just completed now in 2024. So it's very hard to get people to talk about race in the past, and it's even harder to get people to talk about these kind of topics with something that happened so presently. Something, especially something that people were so affected by, their families were affected by. Um, so it was tough, and so I tell this story because I kind of, when I make the documentaries, like, I didn't know if this film would actually happen, if it would go forward. The trial maybe was going to come through. I'd written the letter, and I went we went up there and we were defeated, we were like, well, I guess, I'm thinking like, it's not going to happen. And so Valerie found out I had never eaten at Church's fried chicken before. And she's like, Jeff, you got to have Church's fried chicken. Like, we're stopping. So there was a Church's in Brewton, right there, kind of when you come into town.
Yep, I know
And so
exactly which one you're talking about.
we went in, we're standing in line, and she starts talking to this, there's a black man in front of us, older gentleman, and she's saying, yeah, we came up here, we're trying to do a story about Gus Benjamin. We were trying to meet his family, to do this film. And the guy in line, he's like, oh, I know the Benjamin family. He's like, yeah, his grandparents, I think he said his grandparents, that's my neighbor, and I know his, whatever. And so we're like, oh yeah, yeah. And then he said, and his mama, and he pointed out the window, she works right there. And he pointed across the street at the Family Dollar. And it was just like, you follow things. So I get, sorry, I get a little emotional because it was,
No, it's totally fine.
I believe that, and that with filmmaking, especially documentaries, and you put yourself on a path. Sometimes it works out, sometimes it doesn't, but sometimes things guide you, and I don't know if that's God or higher power, but things happen the way maybe they're meant to. And so he said, and I said, do you think she would talk to us? Because, you don't want to intrude on someone's life, so we felt that out. And he's like, no, she's a real nice lady. She'll talk to you. So we went over and we went in and we went up to the first lady we saw, and he was like, are you Tracy? And she's like, no. We're looking for Tracy Benjamin. Is she here? She's like, oh, she just left.
Oh.
And she's not going to be back until Monday. And I said, thank you very much. And we left, it was defeated because I was flying back the next day, so, and, this was all self-funded, like this documentary to start. So it's like you make some, and then you save some money, you go back, on your vacation. I was working full time at the advertising company. So I would spend my down days or my vacation days going down there. So, you have a set amount of time to try to make these things happen. And it seemed like it wasn't going to happen. And as we walked towards the door, this woman comes in, and the lady behind said, that's Tracy. That's her.
You're kidding.
She had forgotten her paycheck when she left, and she came back to get it. And that's how we met. And I told her who I was. I told her about my first film. We were in the parking lot. I remember talking to her. And she said, she took the film. She said, thank you so much. She's like, I'm not sure. I don't know if I want a documentary made. I don't know if I'm ready to do that. And I said, okay. No, I totally understand, but, take the film. And if you want to talk, I'd like to talk. I think there's an important story to be told. And I feel like the real story, from what I've seen in the news, and this was like 2011. So the event happened in February 26, 2010. So this was about a year and change after that. And so, she took the film, and then maybe a week or two went by, and then she reached out, and she said, she saw the film, she liked it. I had told her the intention of the film was to try to know what really happened, tell the story of what happened, and hopefully learn something from it, that something like this might not happen again. Because I told her, I said, when we were making Lillie and Leander, there was a lot of good, and all those people were out there helping and things like that. But there was a lot of fear. It felt like in the Black community and these, other communities, like it felt there was like a tension, and that's also the history was like, it was there. And I guess it's everywhere. But when I went to the South, it felt like, and I'm such a history buff, like I love history. I grew up watching Ken Burns, and like I probably watched the Civil War 10 times in high school. Like I love history, AP history, study for that exam. I loved it. And so when I went to the South, and you really feel the history, it's like it's right there. Like you can reach out and touch it. But there was this fear, and there was like this tension and separation. It felt like it felt like something bad could happen. I don't know. Like sometimes I just felt like something from the past could come back, or bubble up or something. It just felt there was a tension. As beautiful as it all was and rich, there was in some places, in some communities, there just felt like a tension, that could bubble up and lead to something that wasn't good. And I wanted to help tell this story because I thought there was something in it that could lead to an understanding, maybe an enlightenment, learning, a growth, maybe, you know, um, a richness. There's something to learn from this story, and she liked that a lot. That's what she wanted to. So we got to know each other, and I interviewed her and her, Gus's grandmother and some of his family. I did try to reach out to Robert's mother. She passed away. Um, I think a couple years after the trial, sadly, but we talked a little bit, but I think it was hard. It was hard for her, I think, to deal with, to talk about. It was hard for that family too. Both families were devastated by this event. Clearly, losing a child is unimaginable. You know, um, but that family lost Robert as well. You know, I mean, they passed. Both of his parents had passed away, so they never got to see him again free. But
Yeah.
it's a sad story. It's a tragic story, and that was kind of my approach. Is like, it does have true crime elements, and it does, it addresses the past and it addresses the reputation. Like that's a part of it because that's what people bring to the table watching this story. A lot, people from outside the community, they bring kind of that baggage of the past and that feelings, and they projected it onto this case. Um, so anyway, that's how it got started, and it was, again, it was like there was something guiding us. There was no reason that she should have forgotten her check. There's no reason we should have went to churches and that guy should have pointed across the parking lot. And so, I look for those signs when I'm doing my documentary work to guide. So I would say that listen to your gut, and then when things point you in a direction, even if you think it might not lead anywhere, go with it, because you never know.
Yeah, and that's what makes documentary filmmaking so unique is that you're telling real stories. And I know you can tell some narrative stories that are based in reality, but
Yeah,
there's a certain rawness to documentary because you're almost capturing things in real time as
yeah,
they happen. And
for sure.
usually I ask documentary filmmakers, did this have an emotional impact on you? But obviously it
Yeah,
did with you because you became so determined. And
yeah,
like you mentioning, you know, Gus's mom forgetting her paycheck. Like it's just, even if you don't believe in, a higher power, there's certain timing and there's certain things that, I don't want to say it's fate, but it is almost like, it was
yeah,
meant to happen. And I will say, and I know you don't want to give away too many
yeah,
details from, what is actually in the documentary, but
yeah,
I will say I think it took a lot of courage to tell something like this because, as I mentioned earlier, I've learned that the truth can be very ugly. However, if you truly want to grow as a human being, you've got to be open to it and you've got to recognize the bad and the good
yeah,
and make, like you said, that this is a terrible thing that should have never happened.
yeah. And my approach too is I'm not, I'm there to be the viewer. I
Right.
really look for documentary. It's different with narrative. It's the Hitchcock approach, right? How do I dissect the scene and shoot it and cut it together, manipulate it to get the maximum. And there's some of that in documentary, but like I'm a purist. Like I really try to see, like, let the audience experience what it was like to be in that courtroom, right? And the things, obviously when you choose things here, these are the things. It's 50 hours. It was 50 hours, 2 cameras shoot, 50 hours of footage for over 7 days, and that was just the trial. You see how long this movie took. I mean, I started editing this movie a little bit, like in 2014, just a little bit here and there, like the trial. That was the first thing, is to take that trial and to go from 50 hours and let's get it down to 9 hours, right? And that, even that 9 hours is a lot to deal with.
Yeah.
But it was, I mean, it was a monumental, and it was a daunting project because it was just so large. And at a certain point, as we started to do the research and really discover that there was historical record for 1922, and that was, I will give Tom Garner was our researcher, and I know his name has been mentioned because he, on the 100th anniversary of the events of 1922, he worked with the News Journal, and an article was published to put this history out, which was, a lot of it was done, with together, like Tom and I, we worked together on Lillie and Leander. He was a researcher for that, and he appears in the film. But I met him on that project, and he's one of these guys that's like, he's not the master's degree guy with the pipe, from the university. This is the guy that's like in the historical society, going through boxes, has a passion for history like no one I've ever met. I mean, this guy digs and digs and digs, and he digs until he finds what he's looking for. So we got along great. Right? I've told you all my history of digging, like actually physically digging and digging for a story. And he's a great human being. Like, he really cares. Like, he is passionate too, he wants to connect people with their family's history or with their history. Like, that's really meaningful to him to be able to do that. And he's lived in I think he maybe is from Georgia, but he's lived in Pensacola forever, and he's just a terrific human being. And we knew that we knew that it happened, this event. We didn't know it was 1922, by the way. The stories didn't have that, the oral history. He had heard some stories too from people he talked to in the white community. Some people off the record, that, told him stories, but so he had something to go on, and he was doing this kind of independently at this point before the J Project started. He was just curious. It was one of his things that he wanted to try to find out more about. And so he went into the newspapers and he just started digging. He went in the Milton Gazette. He started from 1920. He figured it happened in the 20s. That's based on what they heard. And he just started going through every newspaper and reading until he got to February 24th, 1922. Almost the same date, February 26th, 2010, February 24th, 1922, same time of year. And a tragic event that caused, a lot of turmoil in the J community. So he found it, it was like Eureka. This is it. This is the event. Black farmer named Albert Thompson shot Sam Eccles, a white man. He was a man who was from Jay, born and raised. He had just recently been married. He had a 1-year-old child at the time, Sammy Jr. And, something happened over a stock cutter, not a cultivator, a stock cutter. And, Sammy ended up dead. And it was Albert, there were different sides to the story, just like in 2010. There were different points of view of what happened, what he said happened, and some of the black witnesses, what Sam Eccles' friend, he was with a friend at the time, so there was an eyewitness who was right there, named Joel Yarber. And we dug into that story and found as much as we could, and dug and that's how you do it. It takes a long time. It takes
You
a
want
long
to do it
time.
right.
But
It takes a long
it
time.
was yeah, exactly. And and Tom is like that. He wants to make sure that we have that, and I'm like that too, that we have this documented, that we can back up what's being said or what's in the record, that, and we found historical documentation of the forced removal of Black residents from Jay, which is what we saw in the oral history in Century in 2005. It's actually in the court case. It's in the Albert Thompson court case, which it's in the film. I don't want to give it all away, but
Right.
that's where we saw on the record Albert Thompson said what happened after after he shot Sam Eccles. He was having trouble. I'll say this: he was having trouble getting his witnesses to come into Santa Rosa County to testify on his behalf. They were too scared because all of the Black people had been forced out. And he was petitioning the court. He said he couldn't get a fair trial in Santa Rosa County, and he petitioned the court to move the trial to Escambia County, which they did. And that's where the trial was held, which goes through the trial and all that in the film. Not to the point of the 2010. we don't actually have the transcript of the 1922. It went missing. Not mysteriously. I think just his case was looked into at a certain point again, so it probably got passed around or sent somewhere, and it could be sitting in an archive somewhere. If anyone has the 1922 trial of Albert Thompson sitting, in your back archive, like, give us a call, because I know Tom would love to read that. I would love to read it. I think people
absolutely.
after they see this film would love to read it, to see that. Yeah,
100%. Mentioning that you got to film Robbie Floyd's trial, which, I'll be honest, I'm shocked that you were able to do that, and I think that's incredible. And you've interviewed several people for the documentary. Were you able to interview Robbie himself?
I wasn't, and that's my only regret. I actually wrote to Robert in prison. I mean, spoiler, I guess most people in the J area and that know that he, was found guilty and he went to prison. I won't say the time. I mean, that'll be in the film, but you could look it up, I'm sure. But I wrote him in prison, and we had a kind of a correspondence. There were some things that I heard in the trial, and that made me, I don't want to give away too much, right? I want people to experience the trial pure, or at least let them experience as if they were there, like the highlights of it. But we had a correspondence. He wasn't sure he wanted to do an interview at first. He was, it's a lot, and who is this guy, right? He's not from Jay. He's from Alaska or whatever. It's like, who is this guy? Sure. Like most people. But we had a correspondence, and I told him, and I'll say there's one thing I'll say about the trial that was never known or reported, is that, it was that there was a racial element of what happened that night at the bonfire party. And it was never explored, or it was never told in the media. It was never covered, and I thought that it was a disservice to Gus, the victim, but it was also a disservice to Robert, because there were things that happened before Robert came into the scenario and things played out the way they did that set the stage for this tragedy to happen, for Gus to lose his life, and for Robbie to do what happened. Like I said, I'm a purist in terms of documentary, and I know that's not necessarily the trend, right? I mean, I feel like they want to manipulate the footage. They want to tell you this is how you should
Controlling
feel.
the narrative.
Yes, and that's a very narrative that comes from narrative film. It comes from Hollywood, and it comes from Hollywood is not good at shades of gray. It's not good at that thing. Like, you have your antagonist, and you have your protagonist. You have your hero and you have your villain. And I resist that in documentary, because real people, I mean, I guess sometimes, but even people that do terrible things, there's more than one side to that, like that's something that's echoed in the film, and even in the history, in the historical stuff, that, like, this thing that happened so long ago that's connected to people's ancestors and things like that. And Alice too, right? This translates to that story. But it's like, if you knew some of these people, right? If you grew up with them, or you were neighbors with them, when they were older, and they were wonderful people, they were nice people. So it's really hard to grapple that nice people, or people that seem so kind, could be capable of doing something so terrible. Um, so I mean, that's where the truth lies, right? It's not always so simple. It's that shades of gray is where the truth lies. And my hope is that, for both Gus and Robert, that we've been able to tell this story honestly. And sure, there's things that, you know people won't like, or it makes certain things look bad, on either side, potentially, depending on how you view the evidence and how you view the case. But my job is to tell the story of what happened, and sometimes, just the act of doing that, there's some people that may not like that, right? That tell what really happened, because some things are hard to deal with, some things are hard to talk about. But I think that, like, talking about it and getting it out in the open, and knowing what the root of this stuff, or what happens, as you said, will help grow. That's how you grow. Um, and I'm not I'm not some kind of, like, higher wizard or power, and, like, oh, this is how you fix race in America. I don't know. I think there's people way smarter than me that have probably tried, and they don't know either. They've tried. It's hard. And this is why it keeps coming up and coming back, that this is something we keep dealing with. We like to think in certain things that we're so far from the past. But as I said, like, we're the same human beings that lived then. Those are human beings too. They're capable of the same mistakes, and positive things and negative things, negative choices and actions. Like, they're us, and we're them. So, but my intention is that this project brings an understanding, a dialogue, you know. I hope, but it's hard. It's hard. As you saw, like, and I'll mention this on our Facebook, page for the film. I did a post. We did a post for Gus's, what would have been his 33rd birthday yesterday morning, and it was like 9:30 a.m. And it was just, I wanted to do something. It was a special day. Um, it was a sad day. He was 18, and he's not here. And the post was kind of spread around like wildfire. I mean, we went from 78 followers to like 1,100 in 24 hours. And that was Jay in Santa Rosa County, Escambia County, probably Brewton. Um, and people were sharing it, so there was a desire to hear more about this story. And some people were saying, I felt like I never heard everything what really happened here. And then you also saw, like, the residual effect for not having that understanding, or not really knowing what really happened, where there's this suspicion and accusations, and there was anger towards, and it was directed towards the town of Jay, because of that past, because of that history that never was told, and never addressed, and never never really brought out, when there's these inflection points. And I do think, like, 2010 was kind of an inflection point, right? Because everybody's at the table, everybody wants to talk and understand what happened. And I'm not, I don't criticize that conversation didn't really happen. I believe it should have, but I also say it's really hard. you know I think that a lot of people wanted to try to do the right thing, but it was also scary. You know, there was all the hundreds of posts online. People, you saw all that fear, all that, you know, decades and a century possibly of this pent up, bottled up feelings that goes back to people's ancestors. You know, um, so it's a hard thing to deal with. You know, and I think the folks that were dealing with it did the best that they could, and I think their intentions were mostly good. Um, you can disagree with their decisions, you'll see in the film, but you know, I think people are they're trying to do the right thing in a very difficult situation and a scary situation. You know,
Yeah, it's like I mentioned earlier. It's a situation that should have never happened. You know,
yeah,
and this is kind of me personally talking, but it's, you know, when, because in growing up, being from Jay and then kind of branching outside of it, you know, I mean, even before I branched outside of it, I knew the stories or the stigma of what, you know, Jay's past is. And even, you know, when I was starting to go to college in Pensacola and have, you know, traveled to other places in the area, you know, I understand that, but I also have the benefit of looking at things objectively, and a lot of people don't do that. But
yeah,
I hope have the same hope that you do, that people will watch the documentary and they'll take something away from it, because that's the only way that the cycle's going to be broken, is
yeah,
that, you know, those that are like my age or even older that have children, they've got to be the ones to be the change, because they're going to be the ones that pass it down.
yeah. And no, absolutely. I'm optimistic. I'm hopeful. The film, you know, the teaser trailer dropped, you know, and the trailer is coming on this Thursday, the 15th. And it's, you know, it's a trailer. Trailers are meant to be evocative. Trailers are meant to get people heightened and excited. And of course, the clips are out of context, right? And so the trailers are kind of, you know, they're playing up the true crime. You know, it's a very popular genre. They're playing up, you know, that kind of you know, the danger, the excitement, the, you know, tragic, the horror of the past, you know, and that, and in some ways it's to reflect what a lot of, you know, what you probably think about this incident, you know, like it reflects like what you think, you know, and there are some things in there that are sprinkled in that you don't know, you know, if you weren't in the courtroom or if you weren't at the party, if you don't have those specific experiences. But the film is actually a very emotional experience. It's an emotional journey. And while it's rooted in true crime and it's rooted in a courtroom drama, per se, you know, if you want to equate it with a movie genre, um, at the end of the day, it's a tragedy. It's a tragic story, you know, and in a tragic story, like nobody wins, you know, and you weep and you're sad for everybody that's involved, you know. That's what I hope. I hope that people, because you know, we're so polarized now, right? As I mean, they talk about it, and you see it on the news, right? There, you got one side reports this and nothing else. There's no budge, and this side is this, and they're completely different, right? Um, you know, I resisted that, you know, and certainly, you know, editing, you get comments, you know, like, well, someone says this, you know, you should slap them with a quote that says the opposite, you know, because that's like, I feel like we're becoming used to this as like, this is how you tell a story. This is how you do the news. And I said, if that's what people want, then go watch the news, you know, like, that's not what I'm interested in doing. Like, I want to show, and certainly I'm not going to say that you can't be completely objective, right? Like, you know, I'm a person, like, even if I try to be as objective as I can, you know, who I am and how I feel and, you know, my feelings about things are going to creep in, you know, but I try
Right.
my best not to tell you how to feel about something, you know. But even, you know, I mean, this is like when you get filmmaking talk, like the act of making a cut is a subjective, right, by the person that does it. So, but
Yeah.
I try to be very conscious to let people, and that was what I wanted to do, to let people speak their truth, their experience from an emotional place and how they felt about it and how they experienced it, so that you could experience it from someone else's point of view. And I hope that for both, and I hope that's for both sides, that people maybe go into it with a perception about one thing that maybe in some way is true, right? Maybe some way it's what you thought, but maybe it's a little bit different. Maybe there's something to in that gray area where it's like, oh, well, I didn't think about that, or like I said, the situation where there's things about how the situation developed at the bonfire that was never told that might affect how you perceive what happened next, you know. Um, so yeah,
Yeah.
that's my intention. Like I want to paint people as as human beings, you know. Um,
Yeah.
so
Absolutely.
as best you can, you know, and not,
Yeah.
not everyone participated, would want, but I tried to reach out to as many people as I could. Um, the key people,
Yeah.
to try to see if they wanted to tell their story, and a good amount did.
Yeah. Well, as we start to wrap up here,
Mhm.
tell everybody about the premiere at the Tallahassee Film Festival, and if people want to find out more information about the documentary, I know you've got a Facebook and an Instagram, so yeah, if you want to talk about that, so the viewers and listeners can follow you.
At social media, we're J Documentary, on Facebook, Instagram, and X, I guess they're calling it now.
Whatever they're calling it these days.
Formerly Twitter. We're not that active on X yet, but we're posting regularly on Instagram and Facebook, and that's where you can go to find out about future screenings and, of course, about this screening, the trailers for the film, all that good stuff, behind the scenes photos. But the film, I wanted to premiere in Santa Rosa County, but we're an independent film. So we kind of need a film festival to take care of those things, like providing us, a screen, a venue. It's hard for us kind of as an independent production to kind of go in and set that up and pay for it and all that. Hopefully we do want to bring it to the area. We want to bring it to Escambia and Santa Rosa County. We're exploring some opportunities to follow the Facebook page to see. Hopefully it will be playing somewhere soon at a festival. I know there's a couple small festivals. There used to be a big Pensacola Film Festival, and I think it's kind of, maybe it's scaled back since COVID. I was kind of looking into it. It seemed like there was a lot of short films. We did show Lillie Leander in the Pensacola Film Festival back in the day. They showed it in Plaza Ferdinand, which was
Oh,
amazing.
wow.
They projected it on the museum steps, and it was a free event for the public. And so it was really right where all that happened, the lynching in 1908. So that was actually a beautiful event. So I'd love to be able to do something like that in the near future. But we wanted to show it as close to the J. Brewton area as we could. And that, we were looking in, Alabama, we were looking in Florida, but Florida felt like the right place to show it. And Tallahassee Film Festival was a great venue, great event. So it's going to be playing, world premiering on Saturday, August 31st at 11:30 a.m. And it's going to be at the Challenger Learning Center in downtown Tallahassee. It's going to be in the Planetarium Theater, I guess. They're not projecting it up on the Star Planetarium, thank God. Uh, they don't do that. I saw one of the Star Wars movies that way, and it was the worst experience of my life, where they projected it on one of those Omni domes. It was
Oh,
terrible.
no.
It was terrible. Anyway,
Mm.
it was the newer Star Wars, so it wasn't like one of the Holy Grail Star Wars.
They didn't take one of the classics.
No, so at least it was that. It was the J.J. Abrams, which was still kind of disappointing because I did want to see that in a proper screen. But yeah, there's
Right.
going to be a big screen. It's a great venue. There's 128 seats, something like that. But yeah, get there. Tickets are at the door. They're $10. They're not doing pre-sales. You can buy a pass if you want to come for the weekend and see a few films. They have different passes you can get in advance. But tickets will be at the door. So show up if you want to. If you're going to come over, you want to see it. Show up early. Maybe get there a half hour, maybe 45 minutes early, just to make sure. I mean, I don't know. We might have 10 people. We might have a full theater. I don't know. There's just no way to tell. It's hard to get people out to a movie theater these days, right? I know the movie business is struggling, but this is a story. This is a Florida story. This is a history of the area, and I think people will find it enriching and interesting, and I hope it leads to them going home and talking to their relatives and maybe finding some of their own history and story, and write it down, document it. Get out your tape recorder, get out your iPhone. There we go. I'm dating myself as a child of the 80s right there.
Dating myself because I understood that reference.
I think they're coming back. I hear cassette tapes are coming back, which I was like, why? I mean, I loved them in the 80s, but I don't know.
Records made a comeback, so I guess it makes sense for cassettes.
I never had records that much in the 80s. I guess it was cassettes and CDs. But yeah, I've gotten into records too. I think they're fantastic.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right.
Well, Jeffrey, thank you so much for this awesome conversation. I'm glad that we were able to connect and talk about this, and hopefully anyone who's listening can take away something from it as well.
Yeah, please come out. I know it's a long drive, but if it's something you really want to see, come out. I really think you'll be, and if not, I'm sure it'll be playing at some point in Santa Rosa or Escambia County. And I'll be in Tallahassee. I'll do a short Q&A after the film. But I like I said, I think you'll find it enriching. I think you'll find it really interesting. And this film is 13. I would say 13 years in the making if it was 2011, but we have interviews from 2005. So this film is almost 2 decades in the making. So this is not something that was just created overnight. This is something that a lot of people really had a passion for and wanted to bring this story to the audience. So I would love to see you there. And don't, I think people would assume the worst, sometimes when you hear that, oh, this is, this story is just coming in to go after the J community. Or is that like, really, we just want to tell what happened. So, please do if you can. And if not, the film will be showing near you hopefully soon.
Awesome. Thanks, Jeffrey.
Thank you so much.
Thank you again to Jeffrey Morgan for that wonderful and really, really inspiring conversation. This was the longest podcast I've done in quite some time, but honestly, we could have gone at least another hour with talking about this. And it's a really sad story as to what happened, but as I mentioned in the intro and we mentioned throughout the interview, if you can take something positive away from this and you can find a way to say that, hey, we got to be better. We got to make sure that something like this doesn't happen again. Regardless of whether or not it took place in your hometown, if you're from Jay and listening to this, or if you're living in small town USA, you should take something away from this, and that is you learn from it. And that's, if that mission has been accomplished, then I think this documentary served its job. And for next week, I'm going to be interviewing another filmmaker who recently released a documentary, and it's someone who I interviewed back on the Derek Diamond Experience during its first year, I believe, filmmaker Kurtz Frausoon, who made a documentary about male domestic abuse survivors, which you can watch on YouTube, called Men Behind Closed Doors: Stories for Survival. It was another really powerful documentary that I had the pleasure of seeing, so really looking forward to talking with him about his own experiences, because those are touched on in the documentary. Other stories that were featured. It's a topic that I can't remember being discussed really anytime recently, so looking forward to hearing his story on next week's episode. If you want to subscribe to the podcast, you can head over to linktree.com/realwisdompod. That's REEL Wisdom Pod. Everything's in one convenient location. Social media, podcast subscription, YouTube subscription, everything is in one convenient location. And if you could, please rate and review the show. The more ratings and reviews the show gets, the more visible it is to those who are searching for different types of podcasts, in this case, filmmaking podcast. And also, you can find links to the Welcome to Jay documentary's social media pages, as well as the trailer in the show notes as well. If you want to learn more about the premiere of Welcome to Jay, it's going to be premiering at the Tallahassee Film Festival on August 31st. There's a link to that page in the show notes as well. That being said, thank you once again to Jeffrey Morgan for that wonderful conversation. Thank you to everyone for listening, and we'll see you back here next week for another episode of Real Wisdom with Derek Diamond.